button. All right, looks like we are up and recording. Welcome everybody to our third webinar of providing accommodations and scaffolds. Tonight is going to focus in on Google Classroom. If you were with us previous week, we talked about some general accommodations you could do. Last week we talked about Seesaw, and this week we'll talk about Google Classroom. The link for the presentation is in our slide deck, and a reminder again that this is being recorded.
So welcome. Just a reminder that this is part of the NEA and that our goal is to advocate for professionals by providing professional development like this, and also to partner on professional issues that impact you.
Give me one moment. Nope, okay. So oh, Evelyn, you're doing that one, sorry.
So today we will continue our conversation about how to support all learners in an asynchronous learning environment. But today we'll focus specifically on strategies that you can use to provide accommodations, scaffolds, SciUp features, and elements of explicit instruction using Google Classroom. My name is Evelyn Doherty. I'm currently an ESL teacher in Ann Arbor, Michigan at the middle school level. I've also taught elementary school, 5th grade, and ESL in high school, as well as social studies in middle school. And for the past 6 months, my job has really shifted within my district because I was fortunate enough, along with Kimmy, to have been part of a cohort of teachers that received extensive professional development about 5 years ago on how to engage in blended learning in a way that supports all students. And so we've been able to draw on that, on all those skills that we learned through that opportunity and share that with other teachers in our district. And we're excited to share with you tonight.
As Evelyn mentioned, my name is Kimmy Conrad. The last 2 years I taught 5th grade at Cherry Street Intermediate School in Kalkaska, Michigan. It's a really rural school district. So during the last few months, my focus has been on finding ways for my students without Wi-Fi connection to still participate and be able to access all of the materials. Previously, I've taught 2nd and 3rd grade as well. And this year, as many of you know, I've moved to Maryland, so I'm going to be looking for a new job out here.
So we'll start today, as we've begun the other sessions, with just a quick review of what it is what we mean when we say supports. So when we talk about supports, we're talking about providing accommodations, which might change how students access instruction or how students show their mastery of a skill, but we're not changing what students learn or the content of their instruction. Instead, we're making it accessible for everyone to meet the same learning target. So those are accommodations, not modifications. In particular, we're gonna use the words accommodations, scaffolds, SciUp strategies, which is a toolkit for supporting language learners, and elements of explicit instruction. But the important thing to know is that these are all types of supports, and all of these support diverse learners in reaching the same learning target. Here's a list of some of the common supports you might see on a student's IEP, on a student's 504, supports you might see for students who are language learners, but really these supports help everyone. So this is what we'll talk about today, how to provide these supports using Google Classroom.
So much like what we did last week with Seesaw, if you were with us, we're going to begin our presentation talking about what is this platform, and then we'll do that same survey to find out what your experience level is in using that platform. So let's talk first about what is Google Classroom. Like Seesaw, Google Classroom is a learning management system. You might also see this written as the acronym LMS. There are three main categories of things that you can do with Google Classroom. The first is that you can organize student work. In Google Classroom, it's easy to assign work, collect work, and also to grade work. It also connects well to outside apps. Here's a list of a few of the different apps that you can connect to, but because it's presented by Google, there's really a huge number of different apps that you can connect to. A lot of people want to be able to connect with Google because it's such a mainstream system. Finally, it also allows you to communicate with students. So in Google Classroom, you can post announcements to your students. You can add written feedback to graded assignments. You can host Google Meets, and you can also connect with families. So just like we did with Seesaw, we want to know how experienced are you with using Google Classroom. We're going to have you use the proficiency scale from 1 to 4. 1 is going to mean that you are brand new to using Google Classroom. So in the chat box, go ahead and rate yourself and how experienced you are with using Google Classroom. I see Monica is saying 3, Laura saying 1. A couple other people are saying that they're new to Google Classroom as well. I see 3, 2, 4. We really have a range of experience with Google Classroom. This is great. We're going to have some people that I bet we can learn some tips from too. So I'll give you a few more moments. So I'm noticing either we seem to have people who are mostly on 1s, and then another half of the group is in the 3 to 4 range. So let's talk about what we're going to do with that self-assessment. If you are a 4 or a 3, you're going to spend the next 10 minutes exploring some documents that we have here on this side. Using the same, I'm going to actually put it, oh, Evelyn, you did perfect. So using that same link for the slide deck, you're going to scroll down to, oops, I clicked on the link. You're going to scroll down to slide 14, and that's going to give you access to all of those links. I recommend starting first with the one that says supports for Google Classroom, but then you want to look at those other ones because all of those different apps can be embedded within Google Classroom easily. All right, I'm back to my slide.
So we had a question from Kelly about, can you use what we're just discussing today in other platforms? Today is really focused on how to use Google Classroom. So a lot of the supports that we'll be talking about are specific things that you can do within Google Classroom. So while the strategies might translate to other platforms, today we'll mostly be talking about how to make those strategies happen in Google Classroom.
However, we will talk about screencasting a little bit. I know last week we didn't mention that because that was a tool that was embedded right into Seesaw. So if you're looking for ways to use screencasting, we will mention that later on in our presentation because that's not a tool directly embedded into it. If you are a 1 or a 4 on that proficiency scale, hang with us. We're going to talk now about how to get started in Google Classroom. That way, when we get to the section where we're talking about using supports, we're all going to be on a level playing field. All right, and I'm going to turn it over to Evelyn, who's going to talk about how to get started in Google Classroom.
Great, and I just want to make sure that link is working because I'm not seeing anyone in the slide deck. Is that working for all of you people who chose 3 and 4?
I'm going to post the link again. Thanks, Judith, for letting us know. Unfortunately, we're in the webinar style Zoom again, so we have to rely on using the chat box, but we're here. Judith, will you take a look and see if you can click on that link I just posted? Maybe Evelyn, can you see the link? I see the link that you posted. Oh, I see a new message. Nothing. That's interesting. I wonder why.
I think I figured it out. It should work now. Do you see it now?
I saw it previously, so.
Yes.
Yay, they see it. Perfect.
It turns out it's a little different using the chat in the webinar function, but we got it now. Okay, so great. If you are a 3 or a 4 with Google Classroom, go ahead and go to slide 14 and explore one of those documents for some pro tips. And if you are new, we're going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about how to get started in Google Classroom. So you'll want to start by opening Google Classroom when you are signed into your Gmail, and it has to be your school Gmail. So you're going to click on that Google App Launcher. Sometimes kids call it the waffle. It's in the top right corner, as you can see. Or you can go to classroom.google.com. Either of those ways will get you to Google Classroom.
A quick note on using your school email. For today's purposes, if you'd like to use your regular Gmail just to practice Google Classroom, you can still create a Google Classroom with your regular one. However, when you're using it with students, to make it easier to connect with their emails, you'll want to use your school email. But for today, you can go ahead and use your regular Gmail.
Once you're in your Google Classroom, it will look like this. So you'll see a big white page if you haven't used it before, and you'll see there's a plus sign in the upper right-hand corner. When you click on that, that's how you create your first class. You'll create a class name. That's the only part that's mandatory. You don't have to write the section, subject, or room number. That's just if it's helpful for you. Make sure that your class name is something that students can easily identify you by, because when they open up their Google Classroom, if they're at a secondary level, they're going to see multiple classes from multiple teachers. And you can always go back and change that later. Once you're in Google Classroom, you want to personalize it. You'll see a gear symbol in the banner, and you can click on that gear. And when you click on that gear, there's a few options that you can use for personal. You can personalize the banner to be a different color, in your own image. You can select a theme. You can upload a photo. I've seen some teachers upload pictures of classes. So that's one way that you can personalize it. Now that you've set up your classroom and personalized it, it's time to invite students. You can only invite students who have the email domain from your school. So there's two ways that you can invite students, and a lot of it depends on how tech savvy your students are. So the first method works if you have older students who are maybe a little bit more tech savvy. So in your banner, there's a class code. It's really small, but you'll see that little square next to it. If you click on it, it'll make the class code nice and big. And then students need to enter that class code. So that's more of the way that a more like tech savvy students or older students, that's how you would get them to join, by sharing that code with them. They only need to do that the first time. After that, they will be automatically part of your Google Classroom. The other way to invite students, which is a little bit easier for students, at the top of your Google Classroom, you'll see that there's an option that says People. If you click on People, then you'll see it says Teachers and Students. If you click that little button right next to Students, then you can add their email addresses. And if they're in your school domain, you usually just have to start typing their names and then their address will come up. So it actually doesn't, their email will come up. So it actually doesn't take very long. I highly recommend doing this if you have younger students or students who need a little bit more support, because then it will be much easier for them to join your classroom. We'll show you the student views in a minute. But for right now, just remember there's two ways that you can invite students. Let's look at the student view now. So if you invite the kids to your class, like we were just talking about by typing in their names or emails, when they go to Google Classroom, they're gonna see your class pop up, and all they have to do is click join. So it's really easy for them to get into your Google Classroom for the first time. If you are giving students a classroom code, they're gonna go to classroom.google.com, and then they're gonna have to press that plus button. Once they press that plus button, they'll be prompted to join a class or create a class. They'll want to join a class, and then they'll need to enter the class code from your banner. So again, that's a little bit more involved of a process for kids. So if you can invite them, I do recommend that, especially if they're not familiar with Google Classroom. Or you might choose to differentiate. You might have some students who you know need to be invited, and other students who you know will be able to enter the code independently to you.
For myself, I know I just have students join with the code if I'm with them in person. If I was having them do this remotely, like if I was doing this during that time when I was teaching remotely, then I was definitely using the email method. I really only use this code method if I have my students sitting right there in front of me and I can project the code and walk around and check in with each of them, just because otherwise it tends to be a few extra steps like Evelyn mentioned.
Someone was asking about how do you send a weekly? We will get to that in a little bit. Thank you for bringing that up.
I'll make a note that we want to come back to it. Thank you.
So now that students have joined your class, remember this step they only do need once. How do they get to it in the future? Now, all they need to do is go to classroom.google.com and your class will be there and they click on it. So you can see this student has they're enrolled in 2 classes and they can choose the one that they want to enter and click on it. So it's really easy for them to rejoin in the future. One limitation of Google Classroom is that the student view looks a little bit different from a teacher view. So I really recommend teaming up with a colleague and asking the colleague to invite you to their Google Classroom as a student. So if they invite you as a teacher, then you'll see the same layout that you see on your own teacher view. But if they invite you as a student, you can experience Google Classroom as a student would. And unfortunately, the Google Classrooms, to make them secure, we can't create a fake Google Classroom and share it with you because you can only invite people to your Google Classroom that are in the same domain as you. So the same Google domain. But find a colleague, one who's comfortable with it, and ask them to invite you to their classroom as a student so you can kind of play around with it.
It's so helpful when students call you and say that they don't know where a certain button is, because then you can look on your side and you can create a screencast of your screen in the student view. This is such a great pro tip from Evelyn. Let's now shift over now that we have our Google Classroom, we've invited students to our classroom on how to post content. So there are several different ways that you can post things in Google Classroom. The first one we're going to look at is posting a general announcement for your whole class. What you're going to do is look at the top menu where you see stream and classwork, people, and grades. Look for underneath it where it says share something with your class. Oh, I keep clicking on it. All right. So click on stream. We're going to go down to share something with your class. And in this box, you can just start typing. Unfortunately, when you post in this section, it's going to post in whatever was most recent at the top, and that's how your stream's going to function. So if students have to look for something specific, they might have to scroll through the stream. I'd say that's a limitation of using this share something with your class button right here. You can, however, also post an assignment, question, or material. When you post in this classwork feature and you post an assignment, question, or material, you're going to have a little bit more options when it comes to organizing the material to make it easier for students to find. For myself, I tend to only use that stream button for the most important updates. Everything else I post under this classwork tab, so that way I can organize it a bit more for students. So let's talk about how to do that. On the top menu again, where you see stream, classwork, people, and grades, you're going to click on the classwork tab. From there, click on create. and it's going to give you a menu with several different options. You're going to click on whichever one best fits your needs. Let's talk about the difference between these different tabs. Assignment allows you to create something where you can award points to students. This is good for final assignments, but it's going to be manual marking. So the computer's not going to score it for you. You'll have to go through and assign a grade for each one. A cool feature with assignment is that it allows you to create a rubric, so that way your students can see how you're going to be scoring them. Quiz assignment, however, creates a Google Quizzer form, and for this one, you can automatically mark or grade it. So for this one, you can go through and select how you want a computer to score the work. Now, it can't do this for every kind of quiz that you might assign, but it's really helpful if you're doing multiple choice because it can go through and it can score it for you. For question, there's not going to be any points awarded. So this is good for a really quick question or a quick survey that you're sending out to students. Material also won't have any points awarded. So this is good for posting a reading assignment or any kind of lesson materials where you don't want students to respond, but you want to send them the work. On the drop-down menu, you'll also notice that you have the option to reuse a post or to create topics. I love this reuse post button because then if you have something that is an ongoing assignment that you post every week, you don't have to keep repeating and creating that assignment from scratch. You can just click reuse post and that's going to allow you to reuse that old post. Topics we're going to talk about a bit more when we get to chunking, but this topic folder is so helpful in creating folders for organizing all of your assignments, quiz assignments, questions, and materials. So if you remember, I said these ones are going to have some more organizational capabilities. This topic button is how you organize those materials. When you're posting content, it's going to give you some options and you're going to have to consider the details of your assignment. Give me a moment, I'm going to move this box. So the first thing you'll need to do, sorry, I don't want to click in the right spot, is come up with a title for your assignment and add some instructions. It says the instructions are optional, but I highly recommend including some instructions. After that, you're going to click which class is going to receive your content. Note that if you only have one class on Google Classroom, this box is going to be grayed out. You won't be able to pick anything. That's okay. That's because you have just one class. Topic, again, might be grayed out. So if you've created multiple topics for yourself, you'll be able to click this drop-down menu and select a topic to organize your assignment. However, if you haven't created any of those topic folders, it too will be grayed out. Next, you have the choice to decide who's going to receive your content. It automatically sets to all of your students in the class, but if you'd like to differentiate your assignment and send it to a small group of students, then you can do that with this drop-down menu. If you want to attach a grade to your assignment or your quiz assignment, you'll click on the points drop-down box and you'll be able to pick how many points you'd like your assignment to be worth. If you're using the assignment feature, then you'll be able to create and attach a rubric. Next, consider when you want your assignment to be due. I like adding due dates, and here's why. I had several students this past spring who I found out weren't submitting any assignments if they didn't have due dates on them. They really needed to see the due dates to help them understand which were priority items and which were the things they should be working on first. So I do recommend posting due dates. Second, when an assignment is past due, students are still going to be able to return to the assignment and submit it to you. Unfortunately, unless you archive the assignment, there's not really a good way for you to turn off that assignment. So students will still be able to submit things even if they're past due. But what it does for you is it lets you know which students are submitting those assignments late. It adds a tag to them. So that can be really helpful for you when you're trying to figure out which students might need a little bit of extra push and a bit more attention when it comes to submitting their assignments. The last thing you have to do is click Assign at the top. If you click this blue arrow, or whatever color you're using, but click this arrow next to Assign, let me see if I put a drop down. I didn't. If you click that blue arrow next to Assign, it's going to give you the option to schedule your assignments. This was a game changer for me. So rather than having to create all of my assignments when I wanted to post them, I could go through at the beginning of the week and create all of my assignments for the week and then schedule them for the days that I wanted them to post to students. So this is a great tool for you when it comes to organizing when you want to work on all of your materials. All right, next, if you wanted to add any other materials to this, you'd click on this plus add button. This will allow you to create or to add on something that you've previously created with a Google Drive file. So this is the drop-down menu you're going to get. You can see that you can add something that's on your Google Drive. You can attach a link. You can upload a file from your computer. You can also attach a YouTube video. You may also choose to create something within the assignment. If you click on that plus create button, another drop-down menu will appear, and you'll be able to choose from creating a Google Doc, a Google Slide, a Google Sheet, a Google Drawing, or a Google Form. If you are adding or creating a Google Drive file, so like Google Doc, Google Sheet, something like that, you have 3 sharing options. For many of the teachers that I worked with, this is probably where they ran into the biggest trouble with submitting things on Google Classroom. A lot of times you don't need all 3 of these options, and I'll talk about why. So this first one on here, students can view file. If you click this option, students will be able to see what you've posted, but they won't be able to edit it. It'll just be like a PDF page that they can't interact with. The next one down, students can edit file. This one means that they can change the original file that you've posted. I had several teachers who would pick this option. Students can edit file, and then students would go on and start answering the questions, and it would change it for all of the other students. So unless you're doing a small group with your students and you want to send them something to work on in a small group, you're not going to use this option. So be very careful that you're not picking students can edit file. The one that I use the most on Google Classroom is this third option on here. Make a copy for each student. And I think this is one of the strongest features in Google Classroom. When you use this feature, students will get a copy of, say, the Google Doc, the Google Sheet that they can edit, and then Google's going to send it back to you with their name attached to it. So when it comes to scoring something for students, this is like them turning in their own worksheet or turning in their own page. You're going to see their exact work, and other students won't be able to see the work. So let's take a look now at the student view.
So where will students find your posted content? There's 2 ways. The first is the stream, which is kind of like a stream of conscious. So it's like from the most recent to the first thing that was posted. However, I really recommend having students, teaching them to go to the classwork tab at the top. If they're on a computer, the classwork tab is at the top. If they're on a phone, the classwork tab is at the bottom. If they go to the classwork tab, then things are organized by topics, and it's much easier for them to navigate all the posts in your Google Classroom. So I really encourage them to learn how to go to the classroom tab. However, it doesn't matter. They can click on the assignment either in the stream or the classwork tab. And once they click on the assignment, it will look like this. So they'll see the name of the assignment at the top. Any directions will be at the bottom. For them to open anything that you've assigned a copy for them, they would click right under your work where it says student name. They would see their own name there. So this teacher assigned a Google slide deck, a template to all the students. So when they click on your work, they would open up their own version of it. And then when they're done, they press this turn in button. So if you need help after this webinar, you can use these links for support. They're really helpful if you get lost on how to create your classroom, how to assign students, how to create the different kinds of resources that Kimmy just went over. So we really recommend those. And Kimmy, if you want to refresh, I've added some information about the weekly summary.
Perfect.
So we had a question about a weekly summary. So in Google Classroom, you can't invite parents to be part of your classroom. So they actually cannot view your classroom at all. The only way for you to share with parents what's going on in the classroom, aside from you typing an email, is to send them a weekly summary. In their weekly summary, they're going to see information about any announcements you've posted that week, any updates, and they'll also see if their student is missing any work, but they won't actually be able to see their students' work. So the first thing that you need to do to set up the weekly summaries is that you need to invite the guardians. And I think the previous slide might show how to invite the next slide then. So here's how you're going to add a guardian. In your people view in Google Classroom, you're going to see a student's name, and next to it there's a button that says invite guardians. If you click that, it'll prompt you to enter their email address, and then they do need to accept the invitation, but that's the first step to get the parents set up to receive the weekly summaries. One thing that's really nice is that Google automatically syncs all of their classes together. So they will receive one summary per week per student. So like the math, language arts, art, any kind of class their student is enrolled in a secondary setting, that will all come in one email. So that's really nice for parents. Let's talk about how to set up a weekly summary. So in your class, you're going to click on settings, which is the gear at the top. And then you'll notice lots of settings, but one of them is guardian summaries. So you'll have to turn that on. And you might choose to do that for just one class or all classes. And that will add your class to their weekly summaries that they get for their students. So that's something pretty important to set up and to coordinate with your colleagues to make sure that that feature is going up as well.
We also had a question about how to attach a rubric. So I have a Google Classroom opened here. There are no students in it, but just to show you where to find that tab again. So if I'm on my main page, I'm on Stream. You want to instead go to Classwork, and you're going to create a new assignment. Remember that the rubric feature is only available under assignment. Quiz assignment's a little bit different because this one's going to automatically create a Google quiz. You want assignment. When I'm in assignment, I have to type something and add something on. So we're going to call this creating a rubric. How to create a rubric. All right, and now you can see that I've typed in my title and my instructions. I have the option to add a rubric. This button doesn't highlight until you fill out that title and instructions tab. I'm gonna click plus rubric, and I have some different options. So I don't have a rubric right now on here. I'm gonna go to create rubric. And from there, you're gonna be able to start creating some different criteria. Now, it's important to remember that in the assignment tab, the computer is not going to automatically grade for you. So this is just going to be criteria that you're going to use when you're looking at the student's assignment. I won't go through all of the details on here, but again, if you wanted to use this rubric feature, this is how you would find that. Another thing I sometimes do is on my student's assignment, I'll insert a table and I'll paste a rubric that way. So that way it's not a separate thing that they have to open. But still, it's a very cool feature that you can use to add on a rubric in Google Classroom.
Another thing that I've noticed some teachers do is if they're creating a Google Doc and they're giving each student a copy, they will add the rubric at the bottom of the Google Doc so that it's already there, which is another nice way to save yourself time. Because if you use Google Classroom's rubric feature, it is a separate window to open for students. So they may be more or less likely to look at it.
Yeah, so cool thing that's added, but it is nice just putting it in as a table straight onto the Google, whatever doc slides that you're using with students. Plus, my thinking is that then they could go through and like add a check mark as they go through it. So maybe they're a little bit more likely to use it.
Okay, so this is my favorite part of the webinar. So now that we've given you a little intro to Google Classroom, getting started, now we want to really delve into how you can use Google Classroom to support students. So we're going to start with shortening assignments. So when you create an assignment, you can make, if it's a Google Doc, you can make a copy of that Google Doc. And in the copy of that Google Doc, you might choose to take out some of the assignments or some of the parts of the assignment. And remembering that we're trying to provide accommodations, not modifications. So if you're asking students to show mastery of the same skill with multiple questions, you might just choose one of those questions. And then you can assign it to different students. So this is really cool. So in your classwork tab, you're going to click on Create. After that, oops.
I thought we have it.
After that, you're going to choose Assignment. And when you choose Assignment, you'll give a title and your instructions. And then there's this button that says For. And you'll notice that it says All Students. If you click on All Students, you'll see all the students in your class and they'll all be checked off. But you can actually go through and specifically decide, oh, these students are going to get this version and these students are going to get that version. And students won't know that they're receiving something different from their peers. So that's a really nice way to provide accommodations within Google Classroom. Just like you might make different copies of a worksheet for students in the classroom, now you can just create different copies digitally and push them out.
Do you want me to go back to the pro tip page?
Sure.
Okay.
So this is really helpful for students who struggle with attention, and really make sure to check the IEPs to make sure that you are providing accommodations and not modifications. Because if you're changing the learning outcome, that could have huge implications for their graduation progress. But you don't need to have an IEP that says shortened assignments. That's a decision you can make as an instructor for students with IEPs or other students as well. The next thing that Google Classroom lends itself well to doing, but it takes a little bit of maneuvering on your end, is chunking information. So right now you can see this is a class where I have posted all of the content and it's not organized at all. So this would not be a great way to present the content chunked. Instead, there's a few ways you could chunk content. So you'll see this teacher has created a topic for each week. And underneath the topic, they've assigned the assignments for that week. So that kind of chunks the classroom for students more, and it helps them focus on what they need. Another way to chunk information that goes even more, or this is a different way, you can also do it by topic. So the first teacher did just date, this teacher did topics and dates. Again, that's another way to chunk information. My personal favorite is the, this is another way to chunk information. You can create at the bottom assignments from previous weeks. And when you're done with an assignment, you can drag it down and put it in the assignments from previous weeks so that it's still there, but it's really clear to students that that's past work. So that's a really nice way to chunk information. And I think we're finally there. Oh,
This
this
is
is
how.
how you do it. You can go to topic. So you go to create topic, and that's how you would create a topic. My personal favorite way to chunk.
I wonder, we might not have a picture. You might have. I think last time you brought up.
Yeah, my favorite way to chunk in Google Classroom is what you can see right now on the slide. So having a topic for the date, and then having each part of the assignment chunked into different assignments. So for example, you can see this assignment had 5 parts: an introduction video, a discussion, an ed puzzle, a Google form, and an opportunity to share on Flipgrid. But they're chunked into 5 different assignments that can be completed as students have the time to do so. So that's a really nice way that you can chunk information in Google Classroom and chunk an assignment even further into subparts. You can drag and drop those assignments in any order under a topic once they've been posted. I really like to include the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and do that consistently so that kids can really see the progression. And this is less overwhelming for them than getting one big Google Doc that they have to scroll through for all of their parts. But again, these are all great ways to chunk information.
Another thing that you can do in Google Classroom is read directions and text out loud. If you were with us last week when we talked about Seesaw, this support was embedded directly into their platform. This isn't part of Google Classroom, so you have to do a little bit of tweaking in order to get it to work, but it's such an important support to offer to your students. I think it's really worth spending the extra time to do. So what you're going to do is when you're creating an assignment, click on Add, and from there you're going to be adding in a video of yourself reading through those directions. So some options that you have for that are using screencasting, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment. Make sure when you are adding in a video of yourself reading the directions or reading the text that you're considering the learning objective for your video. If your video is going to be something more fun for students to watch rather than something that's helping to teach the objective, it might not be the most helpful video to include. Also, rather than including just one video, you might think about breaking your videos into chunks. Just like Evelyn said, one long 5-10 minute video could seem overwhelming to students. So rather than putting in one video, if you go through and you attach your videos, short videos to each one of your chunks, it's going to be easier for students to both digest, but also go back and look in case they need help for something. So to create a screencast, I'm not going to go into too much detail right now. I'm going to show you a quick example, but all of the directions are on here. So you can go back and watch these different videos to help you set it up. It's super quick and easy to do, and I'm going to show you quickly just how fast you could be recording your directions. So if you remember, we were creating a rubric. I'm going to get out of this rubric page. And I'm going to include a screencast of myself reading the directions. I like to use Screencastify, and because I have an extension right here on my computer. Loom is another great app that you can use for this. I'm going to click to do my screencast. My internet's slow, maybe it won't work. And record. And now I'm going to be able to record myself showing my screen as I read through my directions with students. Today, you are going to be creating a rubric. How to create a rubric. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And this is going to give me a link that I can include. So I'm going to copy my shareable link, go back to my Google Classroom, click on Add, and I'm going to add a link. Now my link has been added to my screencast. Just like that, you saw that took me an extra minute or 2 minutes. I've added a video of myself reading directions. Students can then choose if they want to watch this video or not. So it's a really quick way for them to self-select this extra support if they need it. I'm going to go back to our slides. Another really cool thing that you can do is that you can use your phone just like how you would a document camera. So you're going to be using a very similar style. We're going to be doing like a screencast, or you can be recording, but you can, as you see in these pictures, set up your phone to use it as you would your document camera in your classroom. I won't watch the video right now, but later on you can come back to this slide to watch this video to see how to set up your phone as a doc camera. Evelyn, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, so we worked with a lot of teachers who were really intimidated by screencasting. They described themselves as people who weren't tech savvy, and they just said, you know, it's really too much for me to do. And then they watched that 4.5-minute video on the first page. They went through and followed the steps, and in about 25 minutes, they were up and running with screencasting. It was much faster for them to figure out screencasting than Google Classroom. So really, truly, anyone can do it, and it syncs up so nicely to your drive. The document camera option with your phone, it looks like it might be simpler, but there is an extra step of, now that you have the file to your Google Classroom, and with screencasting, it does that for you. So that's really nice. And Kimberly also does a lot of great, she'll hold up like a whiteboard, which she'll get to in a minute when she's screencasting. So sometimes she'll even make like a mini lesson. So if you're more used to writing as opposed to using your screen, you might find that still works for you.
Building off what Evelyn said, with some teachers being a bit intimidated by screencasting, there was a teacher in my building who she often looked for videos that were teaching the content that she was teaching, and she thought that that would be an easier method. When she started doing screencasting, she told me she was saving so much time every week because she wasn't having to scroll through all these other videos to try to find one that like exactly fit her needs. Instead, she was able to create a very quick video of herself teaching that. So it ends up saving a lot of time, I think. The next thing we want to talk about is providing language supports in your Google Classroom. So if you remember, we talked about how you could make a copy for each student when you're attaching a Google Doc, a Google Slides, whatever it is that you want to attach. When you're doing that and you're attaching those items, think about how you can include language supports into those Google Docs. So you can see on here in my instruction page, I included a sentence frame on here where students can go through and they can fill in those blanks. However, a lot of times I'm finding that students don't always reference the instructions on the instruction page when they open up their Google Doc. So instead of just putting those language supports in your instructions, also then put them in your Google Doc. So you can see on here, I'm using colors, I'm using these sentence frames so students can go through and then create those sentences. They don't have to flip back and forth between the instructions in the Google Doc to find them. Instead, everything is in one space for them.
Another great support that you can easily provide in Google Classroom is adding videos or adding visuals or pictures to your assignment. So just like you saw Kimmy adding her screencast, you can add a visual by going to Add, and then I usually go to Google Drive, and you can even search within Google. Make sure that because you can only have one image, think really carefully about your image. And think about how your image might support students who can't always access the written or oral text. So for example, I've been noticing a lot of teachers using really cute Bitmojis, which are really great. But sometimes those images don't always help students comprehend the task or the text and can be kind of confusing. So if you only have one image, think really carefully about what image would help your students activate background knowledge and support them in the task.
Actually, going back to this one, Evelyn, if we wanted to attach multiple images, so if instead of going to Google Drive and inserting one image, what could we do so that way we could include multiple images in our file?
Do you have an answer for that?
I was just thinking about how, so Evelyn, when she makes up her Google Docs, she does such an awesome job of, you can see on this one where I have those language supports on here, she'll include multiple pictures and she'll add captions to each one of those pictures. So that way students have a frame of reference for each one of those pictures, and they don't have to go through and click on multiple links in order to open up each of those pictures. The more you can put everything into one Google Doc or one Google slide, the more likely students are going to look at those materials.
Yeah, and I will share with you a template right now in the link. And Kimmy, if you're able to open that template up. So this is an example of one way that teachers have been choosing to push out lessons in our district. So you'll see at the top, there's learning targets, then there's a learning schedule. A visual schedule is another accommodation for students. You'll notice that if you go down, there's space for, there's a graphic organizer embedded within the Google Doc, a See, Think, Wonder. Again, this is just a blank template. And then if you go down, you'll see like here, we usually use the yellow box as a symbol to students that they need to share their response. And in the bottom of the yellow box, we put optional sentence chart starters. So if you drag your images into a Google Doc like this, then you can add multiple images that really support understanding.
I see many of you are accessing this Google Doc. That's great. Feel free to make a copy of this so that way you can use it for your lessons too.
Okay, we also want to talk with you about graphic organizers. So there's a few ways to provide graphic organizers to students. My personal favorite is in a Google Doc where you make a copy for each student. So for example, the template that we just pushed out to you had a See, Think, Wonder graphic organizer. And you can add that as a copy for each student so students can type in the graphic organizer. Another option is to create a Google drawing like you're seeing here. And you, this gives you a little bit more flexibility. Like you can see here, there's a table that someone has created within Google Drawings. But it's really cool that in Google Drawings, you can add like Venn diagrams, or you can add shapes to your graphic organizers. So that can be really helpful too. There's that example of a Venn diagram, and you can go to that by adding those shapes. And then students can type directly on that. Again, you'll probably want to model that graphic organizer just like you would in the classroom by including a video like Kimmy showed you with the screencasting. And the color coding between documents can really support students. So making sure that in your graphic organizers, you're color coding main ideas, or you're color coding sentence stems that connect to different parts of the graphic organizers will really support students' comprehension.
Another thing that you can do with Google Classroom is provide level text for students. So if you remember, Evelyn showed you how you could assign assignments to different students. This is such an easy way for you to send out different levels of text to students without them noticing that they're all getting different levels of text. If you've ever used the website Newsela, they actually have a Google Classroom feature embedded right into it, so that way you can assign the articles in Newsela. If you're interested in learning more about how to assign level text to students in Newsela, there's a video on here that you can access after this webinar.
There's one more thing I want to mention before we go on to want to learn more. I'm sending you another link in the chat box. And Kimmy, I'm actually going to steal the share screen from you.
I can click on it too if it's not working. I might have to stop here. Go ahead and try again.
There we go. So here's another template with lots of graphic organizers in it. Another really cool thing you can do with graphic organizers is, so you'll see here, we've inserted a Google drawing. Now here's something really cool. It's in a Google Doc, but students can just double click and now they're in the Google drawing. So they can type on top of it. They can put their ideas here. And then when they press save and close, I'm not going to do that now because it'll mess up the template, but then it'll show up there in the picture. So that's another cool way you can add graphic organizers. Another option I wanted to show to you is that students can share their handwritten responses within a Google Doc, or you can use the app Flipgrid, which we've included information about as well at the end of this presentation if you want them to share videos. We've got some videos here that teach students how to take pictures and upload them from both computers and phones. They're short, student-friendly videos. They're about 45 seconds. Feel free to use them. But essentially, on a Chromebook or a phone, students can go to, so they click here, they would go to Insert, they would go to Image, and then they would go to Camera. And now you're gonna see me, and they can hold up whatever, like if they've drawn something or if they've done a visual representation or a handwritten response, they can hold it up like this, take their picture, press insert, and then it goes right in the doc. And again, there's directions for kids here if you want to use those videos, how to do that from a computer and how to do that from a phone. So again, please do feel free to use any of these if they're helpful for you. These aren't really specifically Google Classroom, they're more Google Docs, but you can easily push them out on Google Classroom.
I think that's such a big advantage to using Google Classroom is that it gives you easy access to all of the other Google Suite apps that are out there.
Okay, so we are coming in the end of our time together.
You pull up to slide 60 first. I just want to mention some of those resources. So if you are interested in learning about any of the other resources that you see here on the page because you'd like to connect them to Google Classroom or you just want to know more about them, you can go back into our slide deck and there are links here for each one of these resources. I know sometimes you just need a little bit more time where you can play at your own pace. So this is a great way to do some more exploring. If you have any questions, our email addresses are on here. Feel free to reach out to either one of us after this webinar, and we'll get back to you and answer your questions. Evelyn is going to go, or I can actually do it, Evelyn. I'm going to go ahead and post our exit survey. And let me grab it, our exit survey into the chat box. If you wouldn't mind taking that. We also have another webinar coming up. This one won't be hosted by us, but it sounds like a great webinar covering a really important topic. All right, I got that link.
So thank you so much. Kimmy and I are going to stick on around for questions, but the time is 6:30. If you are able to take that exit survey that provides really, really valuable information for us, Geraldine asked us to mention as well that this webinar will be posted with the other webinars on the website that they've put together for you. And we really hope that you're able to join Geraldine on Wednesday, July 22nd to learn about how to be an anti-racist educator.
I think I need to repost that. Yes, I can post our email addresses again.
Do we have a training class for parents of kindergarten classes? Beverly, can you tell us a little bit more? Do you mean training parents how to use Google Classroom?
That's such a good idea to have a training specific to parents.
So we don't have one ready to go, but that might be something you could ask Geraldine or your union about. In particular, I'm wondering, Beverly, do you have any freedom in what learning management system you use with your kindergartners? Is the school asking you to use Google Classroom, or do you have some flexibility with maybe Seesaw? We're asked to use Google Classroom. Okay, so that would be something really good to reach out. I mean, we would be happy to come back and do one about that because I think that is so important for, especially in kindergarten, to help the kids with Google Classroom because it's doable. I've seen teachers use Google Classroom in really beautiful ways, but it'll be so important to have the parents on board. So I'm sorry we don't have a resource for you right now ready to go, but please do ask Geraldine about that.
We would love to put something together for you. I think that'd be such a nice idea because even with my fifth graders last year, I know a lot of them ended up asking parents for extra support. So just having some resources ready to go for parents in the fall would be a good idea.
Also, if there's anything else you wanted us to show you how to do in Google Classroom, we're happy to show you.
Otherwise, tune in Wednesday to learn how to be an anti-racist educator. That sounds like a really great event. And thank you for coming. We're sorry we couldn't see you in person today. Beverly, I'll go ahead and repost that exit survey link. Let me know if it's not working for some reason too.
Here it is. I think.
What did you have to adjust on the link so it would work in the webinar form, Evelyn?
If you go to 2, it says all panelists, but you have to change it to all panelists and attendees.
Thank you. Oh, I'm posting to all. Let me repost again though. Oh, you just stuck it in. I see what you mean. That's such an interesting difference between the webinar and the chat one. And Clay, if you're able to, we can stop recording at this time.